What if I told you that you can actually read and enjoy poetry, but that you've been conditioned to believe otherwise? That the fundamental way our education system is structured has fed you a lie about what it even means to understand a poem. A lie that implies that you are somehow too stupid to understand poetry, and that the only type of poetry you can understand is tweets with indents in them. Well, this is new. Hi, my name is Danae Young, and I am a chronic poet. Thanks for your condolences. Don't be fooled by the minimalist outline drawings of naked women on my wall. I actually am not an Instagram poet.
She thought she ate that. She thought she ate that.
If you do want to check out what work I do write and publish, my link to my website is down in the description. And without further ado, let's get into it. So for the first video of this channel, I thought I would do something hopefully uplifting for people who have always been scared to kind of try poetry. This is my very first video on the channel, so pray for me. It is so incredibly common for people who otherwise enjoy reading to just be like, yeah, I don't get poetry. I don't enjoy reading it because I just can't grasp the meaning of it. Like, what on earth are they saying? Essentially gatekeeping themselves from the genre. I see this all the time, not only in online discourse, but also in the interactions that I had with my high school students when I was teaching creative writing. Then there's the flip side, the people who, when they read a poem and don't feel like they understand it, become defensive. Well, I don't understand it because like it doesn't make sense. It's a bunch of hullabaloo, basically. Poetry is simply an elitist way of saying nothing with fancy, embellished words. We'll take a look at an example of someone with this perspective a little bit later on in the video. But for now, it's time we debunk the myth of poetic incompetence, the demeaning and honestly insulting notion that the average reader, or person for that matter, is incapable of reading, understanding, and enjoying this genre of literature. I think a lot of the issue here is how we were taught to approach poetry in schools, and this emphasis on understanding it as if it's a message to be decoded in order to reveal some underlying objective meaning through analysis that is then given a grade. This misguided approach could be partially due to the fact that a lot of the literature that the canon tells us to study is written in different versions of English. So in a sense, we kind of are decoding and translating the original text that we're presented with. People are so focused on trying to figure out what different words even mean so that they can begin to understand what is going on narratively, that they kind of end up thinking of poetry as a type of translation. And the problem with this is that it relies on the notion that poetry has a correct meaning to uncover and translate. These pieces of literature are also often prosaic and more based on narrative than modern poetry, which means that there kind of is a correct series of events, a chronological order to what happens to the characters. There is an objective meaning, in a sense. Another issue with only looking at these types of older poems instead of integrating modern poetry is that they've already been analyzed and dissected over and over again for hundreds of years. A lot of times teachers just want students to come to more or less the same conclusion as, is written on SparkNotes. And I'm not saying we should do away with the classics. I just think it should be more balanced. Don't get me wrong, analyzing and uncovering different aspects of meaning within a poem is important. I'm not going to pretend like it's not, but I resent how it's been kind of twisted and turned into the main focus of the experience of reading poetry. Frankly, I think my good friend Roland would agree with me. So why do schools teach it like this? Well, it has a lot to do with teachers' own internal insecurities and misconceptions about the genre. And this is taken from conversations that I've had directly with teachers, English teachers. As someone who has taught at both the elementary and high school levels, it was honestly disheartening to see how many English literature teachers almost seemed to think that poetry was a bad word and kind of made it seem like they just wanted the 1 week of the poetry unit to be over. I think they're uncomfortable because as teachers, they have been told a similar lie. They've been told that they need to have answers. If a student has a question, the teacher is like the beacon of knowledge. If she or he does not have an answer to that question, it makes them look unqualified. And in this case, if a student asks, what does this metaphor mean? What did they intend to do by incorporating the simile? and the teacher does not know the objective answer, that can make them look like they don't know what they're doing, and that can in turn make them lose some respect within a classroom setting. I know, I was a teacher. And I think a lot of this stems from a cultural emphasis on data and objective truth and results. Our education system is dominated by this right and wrong sort of light switch approach to everything, which, while it is absolutely necessary for different subjects such as math or science, it is diabolical for a subject such as poetry. Many teachers have started recognizing that a different approach is needed for art classes, but unfortunately, because poetry isn't really seen as an art, it kind of just gets looped in with English literature. I mean, side tangent, I think that literary analysis should move away from this type of approach in general, but especially for poetry, which needs to be read in a different way than other genres. And it's funny because the way that it can be read is actually so much more freeing and less restrictive than how you would read a novel, for example. But it's just not perceived that way. So what is the result of all this? People grow up afraid to truly sit with unknowns and contemplate them. Without certainties, we feel immediately uncomfortable and we evacuate. Everyone needs to end up with an answer, and if not, what was the point? They are so focused, in fact, on like, oh, I need to understand what I'm reading, that they completely ruin the reading experience for themselves. And look, as I said, I've worked as a teacher. I don't want to give them any more unnecessary flack, especially given that they've got a lot on their plate. I don't think it's their fault. But the fact is, it's kind of like this inescapable generational cycle. Children associate poetry with that 1 week where they weren't able to analyze it correctly enough to get an A in middle school, and they grow up to be teachers. Teachers who must uphold this role of authority and intellectual superiority at all times in the classroom. And so they lean on centuries-old analyses of poems, marking students' grades up or down depending on how correct it is, waiting anxiously for that week to be over so that none of their students find out that they actually aren't a good poet and they never understood it to begin with. People who don't become discouraged become resentful of the genre. I came across this video of a published author, not a poet, essentially explaining his thoughts on the craft of poetry. He pulls out a poem from the Paris Review, which is a pretty highly regarded literary magazine in the world of poetry, and he says, I don't understand this, but the problem isn't me, it's the poetry. In fact, most poetry is bad. It's nonsensical gibberish, like no wonder it doesn't make sense to me. So let's take a look at this video.
Welcome back to Bad Writing. My name is Joshua Fields Milburn. I'm an Emmy-nominated and New York Times best-selling author and a writing instructor at howtowritebetter.org. Now today we're going to talk about something we don't usually talk about, poetry. Here's a confession. I was not into poetry for many years. Even after becoming an author, I couldn't pick up poetry and really get it. Now, I figured out why, finally. Most poetry sucks. Most poetry is just bad writing. And I couldn't figure that out until I found some really beautiful, good poetry. We're going to start with some bad poetry, though. And I'll flip through it, I'll read passages to my daughter. And quite often she won't understand the poetry. But quite often I won't understand it either. Here's a poem.
Bruh.
John Kinsella. It's called Red-Capped Parrot Cynosure. Sunset in the valley, which is still some time away from official sunset, this inland of an earlier nautical twilight. But at the fastigium of the dead central limb of a York gum, at the southwest corner of the red shed, a red-capped parrot highlights or is highlighted. What the hell are they talking about, right?
Wait, Joshua. Sir, you did not even stick around for the second half of the poem. That's like when motherfuckers be leaving like 20 minutes into the party and then going around telling people that was lame. Like, we hadn't even brought out the themed cocktails yet, the brownies were in the oven, and everyone was gonna get their own party favors at the end of the night, but you're lost, I guess. 4 lines in, and this brilliant New York Times bestselling author has already given up on his ability to get the poem the way that he thinks that he should, eventually shifting blame to the poem itself. Now, when I read this poem through, it's definitely not my favorite, but that's not because I think it's some nonsense that I just can't grasp. It is more abstract, certainly, but I would definitely want more time with it, multiple readings of it, in order to reach a conclusion about how layered and nuanced I think the messaging is. In this example, if he did actually finish reading all of the poem, he just did this off screen, I feel confident that nonetheless, halfway through, he had already kind of given up on seeing this poem through. In other words, he was already itching to move on. He had already made a judgment about it. And I guess the poets and the people on the editorial team who chose this piece out of hundreds, and all the people who subscribe to the Paris Review and, pay monthly money to read the poetry section in that magazine, they're all kind of pretending to enjoy reading this piece. They're pretending to understand it. And as for the author, well, I guess, they wrote this nonsense because they wanted to seem smart, right? And they just wanted, I guess, like a check, because poetry is known for like being really lucrative, right? And it's such a highly respected art form in society too. Like they would get a lot of clout for being a poet, right? Wait, what's that?
But what about the possibility that, hundreds of other people can find value in something that you don't personally connect with, and maybe just because you didn't understand something doesn't mean everyone else must just be pretending to understand it.
Yeah, what is this liberal nonsense? Get the snowflake out of the studio. Poetry being subjective? Yeah, right. Yeah, poetry is just like other types of expression. Comedy, art, both objective. The author then goes on to show another poem, which he believes to be good poetry, an example of poetry done right. The poetry that he had essentially been missing out on. So let's take a look at this poem, shall we?
In a dream, I saw my mother with the love of her life and no children. It was the happiest I'd ever seen her. Oh.
A poem that has no poetic devices and could be a sentence in a piece of prose, but with indents in it. To me, when I look at this poem and most of Rupi Kaur's work, it just shows no indication of poetic craft. I just genuinely don't see anything here that makes it poetry. It feels like he's running away from what poetry actually is, what makes it poetry, which is the simile, the metaphor, the abstract language, because he's decided he doesn't understand it. People have been robbed of the right teaching approach and are turning their back on the genre entirely as a result. And no, I'm not talking about people who just say they don't enjoy poetry. I'm talking about people who say they don't enjoy it because it's actually just nonsense. Like, this man is a published author. He is perfectly capable of getting poetry without removing all the poetic devices from it.
A nothing burger.
Nothing. And how much did that cost you?
£2.89.
But I believe that he, like many other bright authors and thinkers, has been conditioned to operate through a problem-solution mindset. This may work for some types of prose. Like, for example, in a novel, the characters are usually faced with some seemingly insurmountable issue or challenge, right, that they have to overcome by the end of the book. They have to find a solution to the problem, be it emotional or physical. But bringing this expectation to poetry makes its lack of answers feel insufficient. He even kind of confirms this when he explains why he likes the Rupi Kaur poem. He says this:
And that is what good poetry does. That's what good writing does. It makes us feel something in our hearts that we've known in our heads all along.
He's implying that there's some unspoken thought or piece of information that needs to be articulated and articulated accurately. But what if poetry isn't all about excavating some deep truth that you've known all along? Rather, what if it introduces you to something new, some new thought experiment or concept or philosophy? Maybe an emotion that you've never really fully explored, even if you've kind of experienced it in bits and pieces. Something that makes poetry unique as a genre is that you can re-experience it 100 different times over the course of days, weeks, years. Not only that, but usually the reading experience is different each time, even if it's just by a little bit. It's part of what makes it so interesting as a genre to me, and so beautiful. Now, the comments on this video are pretty contentious, but I do want to highlight this one because I feel like it articulates, at least partially, what I'm trying to get at. I believe that in order to read and enjoy poetry, you have to make somewhat of a home in ambiguity. Almost like a nomad. Become comfortable exploring concepts that may never reach a definitive endpoint. Sit in that discomfort, and eventually it will go away. Not only that, but your brain will begin to settle into the world and language of poetry, and you'll start to kind of automatically make line-by-line analysis as you're reading. Rather than focusing on what does this line mean, instead ask yourself if you can personally find value in the line. Is there a feeling, an atmosphere that this line adds to the reading experience? Even if it's just adding to the rhythm or the sound of the consonants when they're read aloud together, that's value. If the experience of reading it all the way through intrigues you, reread it. Maybe try to break down some of the literary devices in more detail. Even analyze it line by line if you're into that sort of thing, weirdos. But never, ever skip that first step. Never think that you're incapable of understanding poetry the way that it should be understood. To close out, I am going to paint a little analogy, and it's gonna sound cliche, but bear with me. Imagine you're on a path with no destination, and while you're on this foggy path, you take your time and you look for things that you think are beautiful. You pick flowers from the side of the path. You find a shiny locket that someone dropped in the dirt and put it in your pocket. You take a picture of a cloud formation in the sky before it disappears. And so when you walk away from the world of that poem, that path, you walk away with some beautiful fucking keepsakes in your pocket. And if you do all that and you still can't find a way to appreciate the art form, then I believe it's not for you. Of course, not everyone is gonna love what I love. That's true with everything. But it's really disheartening to see people buying into the notion that they can't enjoy poetry because it's simply not reachable. So try it. Next time you try reading a poem, embrace the ambiguity. Read it closely and slowly and see what imagery and symbolism stands out. But if there's a line where you don't know what the author was trying to convey, or even 3 or 4 lines, be willing to let the idea of understanding go and just let yourself experience it. It is going to feel unnatural. It's going to feel silly and pointless because that's not how we've been conditioned to approach pretty much anything. And lastly, I'd love if you left your thoughts and experiences with this new trial, this experiment, down in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this video and that it made you maybe consider giving poetry another chance. This is a brand new channel, so any type of engagement, a like, a comment, I mean, like subscribing if you're feeling crazy like that, is really appreciated. If you are a writer or author of any kind, or you just found this video interesting, I am looking to do more like engagement and participation with subscribers in the future when the channel grows a little bit more. And I'm keeping a little list of people who subscribed early on to the channel and supported it in its early days. So if you subscribe now, you'll be on that list, and you'll be prioritized for different community things that we'll be doing, including promoting subscribers' writing and potential books. I'm not really sure how to do an outro. This is my first video. So, peace.